Okay, we are at Daniel 6:10. Daniel 6:10. Okay, now, Daniel was a focus of jealousy and hatred by the other administrators under the rule of the Medes and Persians. And what's happened is, if you remember from last time, the area is now under the rule of the Medes and Persians. The Babylonian Empire has collapsed, and now it is under the rule of the Medes and Persians. And particularly of a guy named Darius, who is, we were kind of foggy on this. He apparently was not the king of the whole Medo-Persian Empire, but possibly just of the area we're talking about here. He has been convinced by the other advisors to issue a decree. And if you look at verse 6, they say, "O King Darius, live forever." Bunch of shameless suck-ups. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Okay, what's your reaction? Think about this a minute. What's sketchy about this whole thing? There's a number of things that are just should have set off alarm bells in Darius's head, okay? But it doesn't. Why does it not? First of all, what are some of the things that should have had Darius going, say what?
He was in on it.
He was in on it. Why was he in on it?
This man was, Daniel was, like I say, he was doing too good a job. He was, gaining power and, gaining recognition elsewhere, and they felt threatened by it.
Yeah. What?
Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
Yeah, paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Yeah. As we look at the vast history of the ancient civilizations, what is one thing that the majority at least, of the kings and queens and rulers had in common?
Pride.
Say again?
Pride.
Pride. Enormous egos. Yeah.
They almost all, including in the Roman Empire, were treated or acted or thought they were gods.
Okay, yeah, that was a fairly common understanding. They begin, now, it wasn't true in the Roman Empire all the time. It was only after Jesus' time, or right around Jesus' time, that Caesar declared himself to be a god. Enormous egos. So we've got that going on here. So he's gonna hear this thing as, everybody has to bow down to you as, well, of course. Why else would they not? Okay. So that's one sketchy thing going on here. There's something a little more subtle going on here. I'm going to read it again to you. I'm going to emphasize something here. I've got a box around it in my Bible. This is these advisors and so forth speaking. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed.
Yeah, right.
Now, how many times in the history of this empire do you think that ever happened? Okay. as we look at the history of empires, nations, and so forth, what's something that people in power generally shared? They were all humble people who had no desire except to serve their subjects, right? Now here's some troubles. Yeah. Okay. So one thing we see is enormous egos. Enormous egos. And so they gather around them people who do what?
Yes, ma'am.
Feed their egos. That's right. Was Daniel one of those?
Apparently not.
Daniel, keep in mind, Daniel already has a history of excellent service to this pagan empire of the Babylonians. He's already been elevated above these people before. And, I have no data, but I wouldn't be surprised if only around Daniel did these other administrators ever agree on anything. But they saw it as in their common interest to crush him. Okay? All right. So they all agreed that the king should issue an edict, and it feeds right into his ego. And so he doesn't look at it very critically. Now, the other thing we want to lift up here, verse 8. Somebody read that, please.
Now, O king, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed.
That's a significant step forward in history. Usually, a king had absolute power. If he said something on Monday, like, everybody has to wear a hat in my empire, okay? He could repeal it on Tuesday. Kings often had absolute power. So, sometimes it depended on the mood of the king, what kind of audience you would get before the king or queen. If you were, say, caught stealing. If you were caught stealing in a particular king's reign, and he and his queen were on good terms, and everything was going swell for him, and he woke up feeling just great, he might say, don't do that again. Go on, get out of here. If, however, things were not going well, maybe he and the queen had had an argument that morning, and he had lost, and you were brought before him for stealing a loaf of bread because your 17 children were hungry, he might say, cut off his head. It was that arbitrary, okay? So what we see here very, very early is the rule of law. The rule of law, which is what we supposedly operate under, right? The rule of law. Yeah.
Seems to me one of the other factors, Darius the Mede. Darius is not a Persian.
Mm-hmm.
He's a Mede.
Mm-hmm.
And the Median Empire had been conquered by Persia relatively recently, relative to this time frame. One of the things that is clear to me, at least in all of these situations, is that you got conquered, but everything didn't change. Daniel survived Darius becoming the king, and he'll later survive Cyrus. But he was put in place by Nebuchadnezzar, which that spans quite a long time.
Yeah.
All these conquerings went on. Darius he's an outsider in some ways. He was the Mede who was put in charge of of Babylon, but he's not the king of Persia or the emperor of Persia or any of that kind of stuff. He has a connection because Cyrus's mother was a Mede. But we don't know anything about that connection. All we know is that he got put in place to rule this particular area, Babylon.
Right.
These guys are veterans, they're veteran bureaucrats. They've been around for a long time.
Yeah.
They probably have been in place as long as Daniel has in some cases.
Yes.
So what they're really looking at is Daniel now seems to have risen to a position of power. But they don't like that because he's an outsider too. So they're plotting. But Darius, he's mean. He doesn't know all this stuff. They're telling him what the rule is. I don't know if there's any evidence that says that really was the rule. They've just declared that. Maybe it was a Persian Empire thing, but we don't know that.
Yeah.
So what it is, this is a palace intrigue kind of thing. And Darius, in some ways, is, what do they call it? Well, he's the victim of it, in some ways. They've convinced him now that everybody is against, or everybody is for this, but he doesn't really know that.
No.
Because he hasn't been anywhere in the empire except perhaps in Babylon, in the city. He was involved in conquering because the Medes became part of the Persian Empire, and we don't know again who the players were in that. But it's this seems to me to be just almost a model or a caricature of how bureaucracies work. We see very similar things right here in today's.
Right here in River City.
Right here in River City.
Yep. It goes on all the time. Yep.
I know that the term lame duck, I know what that means, because that means, one's already been elected. But that kind of reminds me of what Jim's talking about. He's kind of a lame duck because he is an outsider. He doesn't know from square one what has gone on, so much in the past. So he's kind of a victim of circumstances, of all these guys that are, they really know what's going on, what gets me is with all of these rulers, all the way back to Nebuchadnezzar, there must be a lot of superstition involved, because these men are, like you said, they're ruthless, all of them. But yet they're scared to death when they see a writing on the wall, or they see they have a dream. Why would they be so frightened? There must be a lot of superstition.
Yeah, the ancient world was a very superstitious place. They believed in that stuff. And, here we've got, as Jim pointed out, a Mede serving under an essentially Persian empire. And you can extrapolate from that whatever you want. But he's trying to make his bones, of course, like any politician. And then his advisors come up and say, man, you are the greatest things in sliced bread. We need the people to worship you. And he says, good idea. Now, they just want to get Daniel. That's what they're all about. So, one of the essential teachings of Scripture is that the root of virtually every sin is what? Pride. Pride. And here we see it playing out just beautifully, okay? I mean, sinisterly, but beautifully. These guys come in, they just work Darius's pride like nobody's business, okay? Meanwhile, Daniel's in the background, not knowing what's going on. And again, man of great integrity, incredible integrity, but more important, a man of great faith, a man whose faith in God is not swayed by whoever happens to be occupying the throne at the time. But this particular aspect of the Medo-Persian Empire, in the history of nations, in the history of the world and so forth, represents a significant advance, and it's crucial in this particular story. Because once a decree was made, even the person who made the decree was bound by it. Okay? And that's what they're talking about here. A unique feature of Medo-Persian law was that once decreed, it couldn't be revoked. So the kings of the Medo-Persian Empire were not absolute in the sense that others were. That they could change they could make a decree on Monday and change their mind on Tuesday. Once it was out there, once it was in the public sphere, even the king who made the decree was bound by it. So, it's obvious that, where these other administrators are going and why they are proposing this. It's a twofer for them. One, they're gaining the favor of the reigning king, who's really just a local administrator, but he's got a lot of power, by lifting him up and saying, oh, you need to do this so that everybody can worship you, okay? So let's make this big statue and say that nobody can worship anybody or anything for 30 days except you. And then, in terms of their own political careers, they think they're torpedoing Daniel, who apparently is a threat to them. So for them, it's a win-win situation. Yeah.
I didn't sense that they had a lot of respect for the king. Because normally, the things we've read in the past is, oh, king, may you live forever, and they're really sucking up. This is, now, king, do this. It's pretty much a demand from the group, rather than, if it be your pleasure, please do this.
Yeah.
It kind of sends who's in control.
Yeah. So,
Paper tiger.
Not only did they come up with what they think probably is a foolproof plan, which is going to accomplish two things for them with one action. Number one, increase their value in the eyes of the administrator. Number two, get rid of what they perceive to be one of their principal opponents, who is Daniel. So they're just complimenting themselves and thinking, we are the smartest people in the world. This is going to be so cool. Yes.
I think it's valid to draw a parallel between the relationship between these counselors and so forth that were against Daniel and the Pharisees and Sadducees who went against Jesus, that they both saw in them somebody who would take their power away.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a threat to their power structure.
Yeah. To me, one of the most interesting verses in Scripture is after Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, which is like the last straw for the Pharisees, for the Sanhedrin. They get together and they say, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? The whole world's going to follow this guy. And then, maybe I'm reading too much into this. And then the Romans are going to come in and take away our place and our nation. Note the order. Note the order. I think that's, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I think it's significant. These are supposed to be servants of God, serving the people. That's why they were put into place. But what's their primary concern? Themselves and their power. Okay? Same thing with these guys. Yeah, Jim.
On that, I think that parallel that you just mentioned is very close. If you think Pontius Pilate as Darius. Okay? No, seriously, he didn't think he was God, but they're not, I'm convinced in this one, they're not talking about Darius as God, they're talking about Cyrus as God.
Could be.
So what they're saying is, don't be running against the big guy. That's exactly what the Jews, the Jewish Sanhedrin and all that used when they talked to Pilate. He's claiming to be the king. That goes directly against Caesar.
Mhm.
Not only is that, he's going to direct it, not said, but hidden behind that is he's claiming to be God. And that goes against Caesar too, because that was Augustus Caesar who did in fact believe he was God.
First one, right?
Pardon me?
First one, right? First Caesar to declare himself divine, right?
I think so.
Yeah, it could be. So, yeah, there's all, you don't realize it when you read this stuff, but there's so much political stuff going on in these biblical stories, especially in the story of Jesus. What's not stated clearly in the biblical account, because it's only a side issue to a certain extent, but Pilate had gotten in trouble with the Jews at least perhaps twice before. He made a stupid tactical error. When he marched his troops into Jerusalem, when he took office, they had little busts of Caesar on the top of their flagstaffs. Now, can you think of anything that would anger the people of Israel more than their pagan, secular, godless governor marching his troops in? What would they perceive those little busts to be? Idols. Idols. And we don't know if Pilate knew that and just was saying, "Oh, I'm going to show him who's boss from the get-go here," or whether he was just ignorant of the people he was called to rule. But one of the geniuses of the Roman Empire was that conquered people could go over the head of the Roman governor who was governing them. If they felt that they were being poorly treated, they could appeal to Caesar. And so the Jews apparently went up and appealed to Caesar and said, "You see what this guy's doing? He knows nothing about us." Okay. There was another case, we think, in which Pilate was trying to curry favor with Caesar. And so he had two big, enormous, I think, bronze discs made for his office, which had images of Caesar on it. Again, oblivious to the people he's called to rule. And they toppled off, okay? And said he's doing it again. And then there was another case where Pilate wanted to put down an insurrection, and he sent his troops, and apparently they went a little nuts and killed the people. And Pilate got in trouble again. So Pilate's, when the chief priests come to Pilate with Jesus, Pilate's in a tenuous political situation already. He's got a couple strikes, at least 2, maybe 3 strikes against him already. And there's a moment when they're negotiating with Pilate, the Jewish leadership, the chief priests and so forth. They want Jesus dead, but they don't want to bring down the wrath of Rome on themselves, because only Rome could execute somebody. They allowed a good deal of latitude in governance, and so the Sanhedrin could punish minor offenses and so forth. But to kill somebody, you had to have the official blessing of the ruling governor. So they bring Jesus to Pilate, and they said, "This guy deserves to die." And Pilate goes, "Why? What did he do?" And they trot out their reasoning and everything. Do you know that in the trials of Jesus, Pilate publicly states 3 times he's not guilty. 3 times he publicly says there's nothing going on here. And he still lets them kill Jesus. We think that what's going on there is that the chief priests, the power in Israel at that time, that they were holding these past things over Pilate's head, okay? Because the last trump card they play is they accuse Jesus of declaring himself a king, which Jesus never did. And they say to Pilate, anyone who says he's a king is no friend of Caesar's. What's the hidden message in that?
Well, he's against Caesar. He's a rebel.
Yeah. The hidden message is, listen, dude, we know what we want. You give it to us. We're going to Caesar again.
We're gonna eat cheese on you.
Okay?
He should have listened to his wife.
You should have listened to his wife. Yeah. Classic example. Politician.
That is a really good example. Somebody should listen to their wife. No?
You know, that would be a great wedding sermon. Yeah. So, there's another theory that Caesar was actually, there was a kind of an inner group called the Friends of Caesar. Politicians, career politicians, who had ingratiated themselves with Caesar. I don't know if they got a little decoder ring or what, you know, but anyway. And that may have been part of the message too. You give us what we want, or you won't be in that group anymore, which may be a career ender for you. Okay? So there's so much politics going on around the trial of Jesus. Lies and political intrigue and everything. And that's what we see going on here too. All right? These guys don't care about Darius. He's a conquering king, for crying out loud. You think they love him? No. They just see an opportunity to get rid of a guy who has shown that he's a powerful political enemy to them simply because he does God's will. So, you know, the humanity in these stories of the Bible is just amazing. And over we see people acting the same way thousands of years ago that they do today. And if you somehow think that this kind of stuff doesn't go on in Washington and Paris and London and Rome and Moscow, you're not paying attention. Same stuff. Okay?
What's interesting is all of these men and the people in general are worshiping all these idols, and yet they feel so frightened of Daniel and his God, because his God, most of them have probably witnessed all this stuff that Daniel's been doing, and he got it right. So isn't it a little bit strange that they would take heed of what God is doing for Daniel enough to want to get him out of the way? You would think they would think, well, that's just a luck. He's just been lucky. Nope, that is not it at all.
No.
And I think it's interesting that they have thought enough about the fact that he is such a threat because of God.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's said that the primary human sin is pride. You know, and when you hear that word, you think of, you know, I got a nice shirt and tie on, I'm very proud of it. I look good, man. Okay, that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about, I'm number one in the universe. I'm the most important person in the room. If you think you are, you're wrong. Because clearly I am. And nobody ever states it that way. Nobody ever really thinks about it that way. But that's at the root of every human sin. And that's what we see played out here over and over and over and over and over again. And in this story too. You know, Darius thinks he's the most important guy in the room. Cyrus knows he's the most important guy in the room. The satraps, wizards, and all the other administrators want to be the most important guy in the room because they think they deserve it, and Daniel's in the way. So for probably the only time in their role as administrators, they all agree on something. We got to get rid of Daniel. So I guess there's lots of lessons to that we could learn from that. Probably the most important one is that why do they hate Daniel so much?
He isn't one of them.
He isn't one of them. His integrity. This guy is so faithful. He is so faithful to God. It's the only thing that Daniel is faithful to, except it makes him a very good administrator as well. And he's valued, he's been valued by the administrators of the empires. Nebuchadnezzar, now Darius and Cyrus. Daniel is a man of absolute faith and integrity, and even when he's frightened, and he must have been frightened many times, he doesn't let it keep him from doing what he knows God wants him to do. Amazing guy. Just an amazing guy. And these guys don't get that. Why? Because what's their number one rule? Do whatever gets you ahead. Do whatever gets you ahead. Of course, we never see that in our political system today, because we've evolved so much, right?
We haven't changed one bit.
Nothing changes. Nothing changes. Was it Shakespeare who said all the world's a stage and all the people will be players on it? And when you know, I think that's so true. When you look at the history of mankind, what do you see? You see the same stuff being played over and over and over and over again. Different scenery, different costumes, different people, but it's the same stuff over and over and over again. The same stuff that is going on in this empire is going on in Washington, D.C., and London, and Paris, and Moscow. Power, and the worship of power. And at the root of it is pride. I am the most important person in the world. It's at the heart of every sin. Okay, other insights? Oh, no. Okay. An interesting corollary question is, why did these kings not think that issuing a decree to have their subjects worship them would not anger their gods?
They weren't thinking.
They weren't thinking. Yeah. These people had enormous egos. Don't get to a position like this. And who was made the point that Darius was a Mede, a member of a conquered people. This was the Medo-Persian Empire. The Persians had conquered the Medes, and yet Darius is still in a position of power. How did that come about, do you think? I don't know. My guess is there was a lot of sucking up to the Persians. Okay. All right. So, his new subjects come to him and go, man, you are the greatest thing since sliced bread. We are so glad that you got rid of that Nebuchadnezzar. We are so glad that you are our king now. Everybody needs to recognize that, right? And Darius goes, well, of course. Because you don't get to a position like that, usually, without an enormous ego. Okay. Let me see. What is Daniel's response when he finds out about Darius's decree, which, quote, all the administrators supposedly wanted? Notice, all the administrators. Daniel wasn't consulting. He knew what he would say. and their goal is to get rid of him. So he doesn't, this is a surprise to him. Okay, let's look at verse 10. Would somebody read 10 through 12, please?
Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed.
Okay, that's it. You know, I think if I was a history teacher, I would probably say something like, that represents, in the history of governance and so forth, that represents a significant advance. Because what is it saying? It's saying the same thing that, that we have here in the United States. Nobody's above the law. Even the person who made the law. Okay? Once that law is enacted, even the person who made it is subject to it, and it cannot be repealed. Okay, so that is a significant advance, really. So, you know, it's worth noting, I think. So they think they've got Daniel right where they want him. Okay, I've got a couple of notes here. Let's look at 1 Kings 8. 1 Kings 8, 48 to 50. What's that? Oh, okay. Okay. This is rules for the, this is Solomon. Let's pick it up at 46. When they sin against you, for there is no one who does not sin, and you become angry with them and give them over to the enemy who takes them captive to his own land, be far away or near. And if they have a change of heart in the land where they are held captive and repent and plead with you in the land of their conquerors and say, we have sinned, we have done wrong, we have acted wickedly, and if they turn back to you with all their heart and soul in the land of their enemies who took them captive, and pray to you toward the land you gave their fathers, toward the city you have chosen, and the temple I have built for your name, then from heaven, your dwelling place, hear their prayer and their plea, and uphold their cause, and forgive your people who have sinned against you. Forgive all the offenses they've committed against you, and cause their conquerors to show them mercy. For they are your people, speaking of the people of Israel, and your inheritance whom you brought out of Egypt, out of that iron and smelting furnace. Okay, so Solomon is saying, you know, recognizing that Israel just sinned repeatedly against God. If they're carried away by their enemies and it brings them to their senses, then forgive them. But he specifically mentions, what I think what I wanted to do this was that in verse, where is it? Number 47? 48. And if they turn back to you with their heart and soul, that's the people of Israel, in the land of their enemies. And this describes perfectly what Daniel's position right now. He's a Jew, an Israelite, in the land of formerly the Babylonians, now the Medes and Persians, who took them captive and prayed to you toward the land you gave their fathers, which is called Israel. Right. Okay. So it's describing what Daniel was doing. If we go back to Daniel 6:10, now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. So it's perfectly describing Daniel's situation. Although there's no indication that Daniel ever turned against God, but he's part of the people of Israel who had been unfaithful to God. They had been carted off to this foreign land, which is what Solomon was talking about. And Daniel now is a faithful follower of God, so faithful that he risks his life. And Solomon says, and if they repent and pray toward Jerusalem. What's Daniel doing here? Praying toward Jerusalem. Okay, so there's roots in this way back. Okay. And he's asking God for help. Okay. So here we've got this faithful Jew in the midst of a pagan empire where he's been, let's see, around the 580s is when Jerusalem was conquered, although he got carried away a little earlier than that. We're now around 536 or so. 536, 537, something like that. He's been there for 50 years. He's been there for most of his life. He was like 15 years old when he was captured. But he's been in a hostile, religiously alien environment all these years, and he's managed to remain faithful. So you have a very honorable name, Daniel. Okay? He's a champion, a tower of faith in the Bible. He doesn't give in, he doesn't succumb, he's not intimidated by the rules of pagan rulers. And even though he's now aware of this situation, of this latest decree, he will not bow down to a statue. He maintains his prayer discipline. And he goes home to his room and he prays toward Jerusalem 3 times a day. He got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. What a tower of strength. What an icon of faith. He's not intimidated by these rulers. You see them come and go. They still have literally have the power of life and death over him. And to him, it don't matter. He's going to worship God wherever he is, however he can, no matter who's in charge.
Hey, Rich,
There it is.
Here we go.
I just have this visual of Daniel went to his upstairs room, and these guys went as a group.
Yeah.
And did they seek out anybody else? But it didn't really matter.
Yeah, because
But as Daniel wasn't in the courtyard praying to his God. He went to his upstairs room.
yeah. But what's significant about that? An upstairs room with the windows wide open. What does that tell you about Daniel?
He wasn't afraid.
Hmm? He wasn't afraid. Yeah. Let me amend that. He might have been afraid, but he doesn't anyway. He doesn't let these nutcases intimidate him, because he is going to worship God no matter where he is, no matter what he's doing.
Maybe a little in your face on this one.
Okay.
Rich, Rich,
What unique or interesting things do you find about Daniel's prayer practice? What does it tell us about Daniel's prayer practice? What's 3 or 1 or 2 things can we learn from that passage about Daniel's prayer practice?
Give thanks.
He gives thanks. How many of you have heard of the prayer formula ACTS? Acts. How many of you learned it in confirmation? Okay. Yeah. I I've always found it very helpful, because when we pray, what's our first impulse? What do we start with?
Our shopping list.
All right, Lord, this is what I need from you, okay? ACTS stands for, you begin with adoration of God. C is confession. You admit that you have no right of yourself even to be talking to God, and that you've sinned against him by, come on, you know this. Thought, word, and deed, that's right, come on. So you confess your sins. T is what? Thanksgiving. And then finally, S is the word that nobody uses anymore, but supplication. And have you found that by the time you get to that one, you've kind of forgotten about all the things you thought you needed so desperately? Okay? But it's a proper order for prayer. Okay? Well, Daniel apparently had a prayer discipline too. First of all, apparently he found a window that opened toward Jerusalem. Okay? And of course we know that we don't do that anymore. But what religious group does pray in a certain direction?
Muslims.
Muslims. They pray toward Mecca. Okay? Well, here we see Daniel praying toward Jerusalem. Why would that be very understandable in this case for Daniel? Say
We
again?
just read in First Kings. What we just read in First Kings,
More specific.
oh. I guess that he remembered that that was what they were supposed to do, or they were told to do, and it would make sure that their prayers were heard.
Yeah. So, what is the center of worship for the Jews? Jerusalem, particularly Mount Zion, where the temple was. Were they worshiping the temple? No. The temple was a symbol of God's unique and special presence among the people of Israel. Is God present everywhere? Yes. He's omnipresent, he's omniscient, and he's omnipotent. Okay? But he's also promised that he will be present in a very unique way among the people who are his chosen people, who are faithful to him. How did he make that presence known when he was bringing the people out of Egypt?
Pillar of fire.
Pillar of fire at night, pillar of cloud by day. And then he commanded them to do what? To build a what? Tabernacle. A traveling worship spot. And he said, okay, you gotta have this little house in the middle of it. And 2 rooms. And nobody but the high priest goes into that second room. This carried over into the temple in Jerusalem on Mount Zion. Nobody goes into that second partition, which was called the Holy of Holies. The first one was the holy place, then the Holy of Holies, on pain of death. And boy, they took that seriously. The high priest went in there on only special occasions to plead for the sins of the people of Israel. When he did, he wore a rope around his waist, long enough to go out under the curtain that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies. And he wore bells on his robes. Not because he liked the sound of them. Okay? What were the bells for? Do you remember?
In case he died, they could pull him out. They could hear him moving around in there.
Yeah. So that the other priests on the other side of the curtain could hear him moving around in there and know that he had not died just from being in the presence of God. And what was the rope for?
Pull them out.
When they stopped hearing the bells. so they could pull him out over the curtain without having to go in. They took this stuff very seriously, very seriously. Okay. So, yeah. So Daniel finds a house, a room, whatever, with a window that faces towards Jerusalem. Is he worshiping Jerusalem? But it's the place he knows that God has said, the Jews are my special people. I have a special mission for them. I have chosen it. I created them for a special purpose. The temple is the place of my special presence among my people. And so he looks that way. Very faithful man. Very faithful. Okay. We'll pick it up there next time. And do we have a prayers? Someone up here? Oh.
Can I make one comment real quick? The gap, going up the steps like Judy was talking about, that visual of them doing that, it reminds me of the woman that was caught in adultery, because I have heard that it is a school of thought that they set her up.
Oh.
The man that she was with deliberately did that because the other man knew he was going to be there, and they caught her in adultery. What are the odds of somebody catching her that didn't know she was going to be with someone? And so it reminds me of that. Once again, it's a trap. It was a trap for Jesus. This is a trap for Daniel.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when pride gets involved, when people's livelihoods are threatened, when people's positions of authority are threatened, all kinds of nasty stuff happens. And that's why that statement of Jesus' enemies, the chief priests, after Jesus raises Lazarus, they're panicked. They're absolutely panicked. And they come back, and without even realizing what they're saying, they say, if we don't do something about this, guys,